We've had for the Lake Picket comp plan amendments. As we mentioned numerous times before, there are two privately initiated map amendments, and there are also some text amendments that go along with these applications that are being considered for transmittal at this stage. Here's a quick agenda for tonight's meeting. We're going to do some quick introductions. We're going to talk about the project schedule, where we go from here. But the primary purpose of tonight's meeting is to talk about transportation. We heard you at the last meeting, and I want to thank everybody for your patience in allowing us to continue the last meeting and continue it to tonight. The purpose of continuing the meeting was to complete the review of the two separately submitted traffic studies by the two applicants, and to allow time for staff to continue to review those studies and to provide more input as it pertains to your questions regarding transportation that we received the last couple of meetings. Some quick introductions. I know that Planning and Zoning Commissioner Rick Baldacci is here. He is your representative for District 5. He and his board will hear this request or these requests in 2 weeks, on July 18th. They will be making a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners as to whether or not the requests should be considered for, should be transmitted to the state for continued review. That will ultimately go to the Board of County Commissioners. Again, Ted Edwards will be with us shortly. His aides are here. We have Lynette Rummel and Edgar Robinson. Here are the two public hearings that are coming up. Again, we are in the transmittal stage. All of these public hearings are held in the board chambers on the first floor of the county administration building. Very briefly, before I turn it over to Renzo Nastasi, who's our transportation planning division manager, I want to show you the maps that we're talking about tonight. Again, these are, we have some other boards and maps on the side of here if you need to look at those after the meeting. But the two applications are Lake Picket North and Lake Picket South. As you can see, they're generally located between East Colonial Drive and the county line to the north. And then to the east, you'll find Chilliota Road, and to the west, the Econohatchee River. Sure. Sure. And these should be on your agenda too. If not, we can provide those dates. Okay. So June 18th, it's a Thursday. It's coming up in just about 2 weeks from tomorrow, or this coming Thursday. The Board of County Commissioners transmittal hearing is July 28th. That is a Tuesday, and that public hearing begins at 2 p.m. Is that good enough? I'm sorry? Where are the meetings being held? In the board chambers at 201 South Roslyn, downtown Orlando. It's in the corner of Jackson and Roslyn, directly, not just a couple blocks from the new Performing Arts Center. This is the future land use map of the properties today. As you can see, the properties are designated rural agricultural, which is that, again, if you were at the first meeting, we went through the land use and zoning of the properties. The rural agricultural designation is a designation that allows for very rural development at a maximum density of 1 unit per 10 acres. This is the conceptual regulating plan for the Lake Picket South property. Lake Picket South is located on the south side of Lake Picket Road, just north of East Colonial Drive. Lake Picket North is directly north of that, south of the Orange County, Seminole County line. Again, the role of the Orange County staff, our goal is to provide a neutral, objective review of these privately initiated amendments, establish a development framework that's consistent with the county's vision and consistent with our comprehensive plan. And it is our responsibility to also work with the applicants to aggregate the policies that would implement this development if, in fact, the board were to ever approve or adopt later this year. And finally, compatibility. We stressed this in the last meeting. Our comprehensive plan states that compatibility is always the fundamental consideration of all land use changes, and it's our responsibility to ensure that. Very briefly, before I turn it over to Renzo Nastasi, here's the schedule. We are in the transmittal process right now. this is, we have those two public hearings we talked about just a second ago. I want to make it clear that transmittal does not necessarily mean adoption. As these applications proceed through the development review process, if the Board of County Commissioners on July 28th decides to not transmit, obviously the requests are over at that point. However, if they do decide to transmit for further review, that does not mean they have to adopt it later in the year. All that does is means that the state will then get their chance to review the applications along with all the regional components of the state review. It'll come back to the board for final consideration later this year. As you can see, the tentative schedules for the adoption hearing in that middle section of the slide, you can see it, is in October and November. And then finally, the last column that's on this slide is the rezoning process. The applicants have indicated their intent to rezone the property should the applications before you tonight get transmitted. But there's no guarantee that they do that. There's no requirement that they do that right away. It is possible that they can hold off on the rezoning until after adoption, so we'll have to wait and see if that happens. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Renzo Sustany. Again, we have to be out of here at 8:30 tonight. After his presentation, there are no presentations by the applicants. You've heard from them in the first two meetings. They are here. If you have questions for them when we get to the question and answer section, we will certainly call them up. But for now, we're going to talk about transportation, and Renzo Sustany has it.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming out this evening. As Mr. Hill just said, the majority of this evening's discussion will be in regards to transportation issues. Fairly straightforward PowerPoint for you, and then we will be here to answer any questions you may have. So, just in terms of the presentation outline, very briefly go through some comprehensive policies that are relevant to transportation, then discuss the transportation study and analysis that was conducted by the applicants and the county staff, go over some general improvement costs, explain what a term sheet is, what an agreement is, what that process is for moving forward with the term sheet and agreement. And then I just have a few questions that we received from the public and try to answer those, but then certainly you will have an opportunity to address any additional questions that you may have. So first with the comprehensive plan land use goals, as you know and as you've heard several times, the intent here, both from a land use perspective and from a transportation perspective, we want to make sure that we create a safe, accessible, convenient, efficient, and financially feasible multimodal transportation system. Also, we want to make sure that the facilities are available at the time the development occurs. I know that's been an issue for many here, but that is in fact one of our goals that's in the comprehensive plan. And also we want to make sure that we integrate land use strategies with infrastructure. The two obviously go together. And we want to make sure also that whatever infrastructure is implemented, that it's available to all users. So it's not just cars, but it's also pedestrians, cyclists, transit, and so forth. In terms of the implementing policies, you've heard us discuss in the past issues having to do with level of service. So one of the things that is in our comprehensive plan is we need to make sure that we adhere to the standards that apply to level of service, whether it's on a state road or a county road. And then also, if development takes place, we want to make sure that the development addresses their specific impacts to the transportation system. And then, again, from a transportation standpoint, we want to make sure that we have strategies and development patterns which promote for a convenient and efficient travel choices and improvability. And then also specific to not only these two developments, but again, in our past discussions, we've talked about the need for an interconnectivity between developments. So in other words, we don't want to wall off developments. We want to make sure that you can go from one development to the other. So this is just a location map. I'm sure everybody's familiar where Lake Picket North is located and Lake Picket South is located. So let me just move on to the roadway network. This map you've seen before, at least many of you have seen before. Currently today, there are several roadways in East Orange County that do not meet the level of service. In other words, they're over capacity. And namely, we're talking about a section of McCulloch Road, Woodbury Road, a small piece of Tanner, Lake Picket, State Road 50, obviously, and also Chiliota Road. The section of Chiliota Road from Lake Picket to the Seminole County line, that is marginal. It is not currently over capacity, but it is nearing that capacity threshold. So moving to 2020, 5 years from now, there is really no difference between the existing capacities today or the condition of the roadways in terms of available capacity versus what it might look like in 5 years. However, when we move to 2030, which is 15 years from now, you can see that there are a whole lot more roadways that fail. And I should have said this at the very beginning. What I'm showing you today, right now, is the conditions of roadways in 2020 and 2030 without either Lake Picket or Lake Picket North or Lake Picket South. So this is what we anticipate occurring over the next 15 years. As you can see, there are additional segments of State Road 50 that fail all the way from Goldenrod to Alafaya, and then from Woodbury all the way to Chiliota Road. I understand. Just what I'm indicating here is that the conditions are really not going to get better if no improvements occur. So we have the same segments failing. And so this is projecting 15 years from now. If you just let me go through this, then I'll be glad to address the specific questions. Okay? Also, as you can see, the rest of Chiliota Road is over capacity, Lake Picket and Tanner. And again, these are roadways, when we talk about Lake Picket or Tanner, are in their current 2-lane configuration, not without any improvements there. In terms of what is proposed in respect to both developments, and again, this is 2030, and we're looking at the cumulative impact, the cumulative trip generation of both developments. So when I say that, what I mean is, we've got 1,800 plus homes on the north, 2,000 south, 350,000 square feet of commercial townhomes, and 7,000 square feet of office. So the important number to remember here is the peak hour number, which is 3,500 trips. Okay, so that is the number of trips that are going to be generated by both these developments in 2030. So this is through build out. I know this map is very hard to see, but if you give me just a moment just to explain what it represents. This basically is a model that is run to determine the trip generation and also how the trips are distributed throughout the existing network. The gist of it is that Lake Picket South, in terms of where the traffic is directed, is primarily on State Road 50. So over 70-75% of the trips that are generated by Lake Picket South will enter and exit State Road 50. That is a primary entrance and exit to the development. However, when you look at Lake Picket North, the traffic is much more diffuse there. In other words, the trips are utilizing the network which consists of Lake Picket, Chiliota, McCulloch Road, and State Road 50 again, just to show you what we anticipate in 2030 without these two developments, just want to sort of refresh your memory of without these developments, what the network would look like in 15 years. But then when we look at the cumulative impact to the network in 2030, again by cumulative I mean both developments, you see that essentially the same network is affected. So essentially by 2030 we're going to need a capacity of 8 to 10 lanes on various segments of State Road 50. Alafayette Trail is impacted, Tanner Road is impacted, Lake Picket would have to be widened to 4 lanes, Juliota would have to be widened to 4 lanes, and a section of the Public Road would have to widen to 4 lanes. Again, this is not that dissimilar in terms of level of service without these developments. It's the same network that's affected.
Can you go back and show the difference?
Sure. This is 2030 without the two developments. Okay. And this is with the development. So when we go back one more time, you can see that there's a slight difference on State Road 50 and also a slight difference on Avalon Road. With the development, we're impacting the same roads. We needed slightly more capacity on State Road 50, but essentially the same network is being affected. So without the developments, State Road 50 will have to accommodate a capacity of somewhere between 8 and 10 lanes by 2030. The same is true with these developments, with some slight differences. So again, what this slide shows in the yellow highlighted, that is an option to extend Lake Picket or Woodbury Road, depending on how you look at it, to State Road 50 and not necessarily improve the southern segment of Lake Picket. So again, there is very little difference between the Woodbury Road option and again, the same network is being affected even without these two projects moving forward. So in terms of what is planned for this area, it's just starting from the western end. The county does have in its long-range plan improvements plan for East-West Road or Richard Crotty Parkway, essentially running all the way to Alafayette. And also from Alafayette to Purcell. So that would be a new east-west road. That last segment of Richard Crotty Parkway has been identified as a public-private partnership. And what I mean by that is that in our comprehensive plan, we've identified the roads that you see in orange as public-private roadways. Meaning that the county will not pursue the improvement of these roadways without the private participation, meaning that development has to help to fund these roadways and mitigate their impacts that are associated with development. As I was just saying, Lake Picket is also a public-private partnership, as is Juliota Road. So that is the county network. And then in terms of the Expressway Authority, there are plans to widen the 408 from 417 to State Road 50. And then the Expressway Authority is also looking at extending the 408 all the way to 520. That would be a new limited access facility. That plan has just kicked off, so they're going through a very preliminary assessment to determine whether or not they would proceed with the actual design and ultimate construction of the roadway. There is no schedule associated with either design or construction, but they are studying it. In addition, State Road 50, as you know, parts of it are under construction, and I can give you that is probably the key roadway, certainly in the short and medium term, that is associated with East Orange County and also with these two developments. So from Dean Road to Old Cheney, I'm sure all of you are aware that that roadway is currently under construction by the Florida Department of Transportation. The construction alone for that project is $70 million, and it should be completed by the end of the next year. In addition, the bridge over the Econ River is being replaced, and it is on the same schedule as the segment I just described. That project is about $13 million, and again, it should be completed by November of next year. But it's only the bridge widening, it's not the rest of the road. As to the segments from Old Cheney to Chileota, and then from Chileota to 520, those two projects are currently under design. The design just kicked off. However, the right-of-way acquisition, if needed, it may look like we may not have to go through right-of-way acquisition for the widening of State Road 50, and the construction are currently unfunded. At least they're unfunded through 2021, and we'll have a little bit more discussion in terms of how we might be able to advance one or both of those two projects. So, as I mentioned early on, I want to give you just an explanation of what the term sheet, what a term sheet is and an agreement is, and essentially it's basically a framework of addressing the improvements that are needed as part of these developments. Should these two developments move forward, we have to have a plan. As you heard me say a little bit earlier, the county has no funding for the county network. State Road 50 is not planned to be improved, at least in the Florida Department of Transportation work program. There's no funding for construction through 2021. So basically, if we go forward, the county wants to ensure that we have a plan in place, a framework in place that would allow for these improvements to take place concurrent with any development that may be approved by the Board of County Commissioners. So essentially, the term sheet and the agreement both are a plan to implement transportation improvements. And as I said earlier, since we have public-private partnerships associated with the county network, we would expect that we would see a significant participation by private development to improve the roadway network in this area. We also need, if I could just get through the, yes, ma'am. Oh, okay. I will get there. Also, we want to make sure that we have very clear terms and conditions that address the development through building. So it's not a matter of saying, we'll just look at the next 5 years or the next 10 years. We want to make sure that if these developments are approved, that we have a plan that will carry through the lifetime of the development. In other words, once we want to get to when the last house is built, we want to make sure that the proper infrastructure is in place and that we address all those issues. Also, we want to make sure that if the county and certainly if private development is going to invest in infrastructure, that not only the cost, but also the infrastructure itself is going to be effective and is going to be viable through the years, basically through 2030 and beyond. In addition, we want to make sure that when development takes place, that they are not given any benefits unless they complete their responsibilities associated with the development and the improvements. And the typical framework or pattern that the county has used in the past, which is slightly different in this case, and I'll just explain that in a second. For instance, you have heard the discussion in the past, at least some of you have, that over on the west side of the county, in Horizon West specifically, the county has had numerous public-private partnerships, and essentially the private development builds the infrastructure in exchange for impact fee credits. But they would get impact fee credits not only for the construction of the roadways, but they would get credits for the study, for the design, for the right-of-way, and then also for construction. What is different here, and the reason why we've underlined the last bullet here, is that unlike what we've done over on the west side, and again, this is something that Commissioner Edwards has insisted upon, is that we want to see the road infrastructure under construction at the same time that, or prior to or concurrent with any building permits. So in other words, we want to make sure that if the developer gets a certain entitlement, that entitlement is conditioned upon the road being fully funded, if not under construction. So in other words, you'll have the construction of the roadway concurrent with or prior to any building permits. So I think that's a very important distinction with what we've done on the west side. And I just wanted to emphasize that. So it's a very, very different scenario here because we want to make sure that the infrastructure is in place by the time building permit is pulled. Yes. So for all of you, and I'll get this into just a little bit more specific, but the question, I believe, was, is it just a commitment or is it actual construction? So at the end of the day, what's going to occur, first we're going to have that term sheet that I was talking about earlier. The term sheet is really just a framework, and it is a plan that would be presented to the Board of County Commissioners. However, if these two developments, one or both, make it through adoption, or at the adoption stage, we want to have an agreement in place at that same adoption hearing. Once folks sign that agreement, it's essentially a contract. If they sign it, they're obligated to perform their obligations, which means they need to build the roads concurrent with the building permits. Okay? And again, I will get into a little bit more detail on that. So, what would the term sheet address specifically? And if you recall in the earlier slides that I showed, we have a lot of failing roadways in the general area. So the term sheet, at least as it's being discussed today, and there is a broad framework that's already in place, we would expect to have, at a minimum, starting from the east side, Chiliota Road from State Road 50 to Lake Picket, improved to a 4-lane section. Then we have Sustany Way, which would extend from Chiliota Road just south of the Sustany County line to just east of the Tanner Road intersection with the current Lake Picket intersection. Now, Sustany Way basically pulls traffic off of Chiliota Road between Lake Picket and the Seminole County line. So that's why you don't see any improvements planned, or at least being discussed for that northern section of Chiliota Road, because traffic is being diverted off of Chiliota and redirected on Sustany Way and then on to Lake Picket as we move south. So again, initially that may be a 2-lane roadway, and in the long term that may need to be improved to a 4-lane configuration. And then Lake Picket, again from just east of Tanner all the way to State Road 50, would also have to improve to 4 lanes. And then you see sort of a big blob there, which sort of illustrates a second option, which you saw in the earlier slides, which would be, rather than widening Lake Picket between Percival and State Road 50, is create a new alignment that would go to the northwest and tie into existing Woodbury Road. That would be a new roadway. I know there's been a lot of discussion about homes and the Montessori school. I just want to be clear that first and foremost, in terms of what specific properties are going to be impacted, that can't be determined at this stage. That's going to be something that's going to be determined during the preliminary engineering study and then more refined during the design stage. But I can say to you with a very high degree of confidence that we're not going to be plowing through, or the developer plowing through the Montessori school or any existing school. That doesn't make any economic sense, it doesn't make any social sense, it doesn't make any sense at all. So unless something extremely strange happens, there are absolutely no plans to go through the school or go through the home there. In terms of the homes that exist today between State Road 50 and Tanner, where most of the development exists today, there may be some right-of-way impacts, but again, our goal is not to purchase any homes. There may be some right-of-way impacts, and I'll give you a little bit more detail in just a second. Yes? Well, no, it is a road. There's currently there's no road there. So the reason why you see that wide corridor is because there's no study that's been conducted. There's no existing roadway that would give us a very clear indication of exactly where that road would be located within a quarter mile, let's say. So that is a new roadway, and we just didn't want to. I don't want to show a particular line. It could be anywhere within that. But again, that encompasses the area of where the school is. And again, I want to be clear, we're not going to go through a school. Let me get through this. All right, so again, still talking about the term sheet and agreement. This map that I just showed you, that is the network that we would anticipate having improved as part of these developments. Okay, and again, just a reminder that in terms of the county plans, all these roads are in our long-range plan, they're in our comprehensive plan, but they're identified as public-private roadways, which means we require to have the private development participate in any improvements to the network that you see on this map, with the exception of State Road 50. So, the term sheet and the agreement would address Lake Picket Road, Julietta Road, Sustany Way, as I described it earlier, the Woodbury Road extension option, that is an option, the widening of McCulloch Road, where it is currently at 2 lanes, and then as we had discussed in previous meetings, we are also working with the developer and the Florida Department of Transportation to see if we can, in fact, advance the 6-laning of State Road 50, at least for that section from Old Cheney to Julietta Road, to advance it to the 6-lane road configuration. To do that, it would require for the department to insert the construction phase in their work program sometime prior to 2021. That determination is going to be made in the next several months. So we'll continue to have discussions with the department to see if that's going to be a possibility. But we're not going to have an answer for that for several months, and I can't tell you what that exact date might be. It is also going to require 2 separate agreements, one between the Florida Department of Transportation and the county, and the other between the county and the developer. So that's sort of the structure of how State Road 50 would be advanced. Our hope, irrespective of these developments, is to get State Road 50 advanced one way or another. So this is the first opportunity that we've seen where we have the possibility of engaging the private sector to help not only the county but also the Department of Transportation to advance improvements to State Road 50. So exclusive of State Road 50, again, talk about Lake Picket Road improvements, Julietta, Sustany, potential Woodbury Road extension, McCulloch. The cost of improving those roads is going to be somewhere between $45 and $60 million. Okay, that's based on the county cost of improving 1 lane of roadway. Our cost is $2.5 million. So that's how we arrived at these costs. Now if private development actually does the design right-of-way and construction, those costs may be significantly less, but in terms of a starting point and giving you a point of reference, the $2.5 million per lane mile is the county cost. I should also note that if these improvements take place, Lake Picket, Chiliota, Sustany, Woodbury, McCulloch, they will adequately accommodate traffic through 2030, at least. So we've got 15 years of lifetime, at least, if these roadways are improved from 2 to 4 lanes. But again, that's going to require development to participate in the funding of the projects. So let me move on to some often asked questions, and then certainly if you don't mind, sir, I have like about 4 slides, and then we'll take questions. So there have been several questions regarding transportation funding, county funding, state funding, etc. Construction time frames, what's the process, what are the requirements, and basically that's the term sheet and agreement that I just discussed. And then the public-private partnership process. So in terms of transportation funding, a lot of the questions that I've heard is, why not just have the county invest in the extension of the 408? Well, the 408 is funded by tolls and bonds, so the county really has no ability or no desire to participate in the improvement or extension of a toll facility. The Expressway Authority issues bonds, they have investors, and that's how those roads are built. So there's no private money, there's no public money that typically is invested in toll facilities or expressways. In terms of the county funding sources, our funding sources for transportation improvements are primarily gas taxes and impact fees. So gas taxes, we generate $35–40 million a year, but the bulk of that gas tax money is utilized for maintenance and operations. In other words, it's the mowing, it's the repair of sidewalks, it's resurfacing, it's signals, and those type of things. So our priority is to make sure that the existing infrastructure is maintained. So we don't want to go out and build stuff that we can't keep functioning. And I should note that our gas taxes are going to be increasingly be used for maintenance and operations, so there's not going to be that much, if any, funding in the near future available for new facilities. And of course, impact fees, when I say impact fees, these are transportation impact fees. For example, a single family residential is about $3,800 per unit. So if somebody builds a house, that's the transportation impact fee that somebody would pay, and it goes into the impact fee fund for roadway improvements. And then in terms of state funding, the only state resource for improvements to the state system is gas taxes, and that's the federal component and the state component. So they don't have things like impact fees and so forth. So as you can see, there's a pretty limited bucket of resources that are available for improvements. And of course, from the county's perspective, and with the economic downturn a few years ago, impact fees were reduced dramatically. We went somewhere at about $45 million a year down to about $7 million today. So there's been a dramatic reduction in people actions that would be available for roadway improvements. What this chart shows, and I'll describe it very briefly, there are basically 4 components for road improvements. So if we were to widen a road from scratch, going from 2 to 4 lanes, or if we were to build an entirely new roadway, typically, if everything went right and we had all the money in place, it would take the county about 8 years to complete a road. So you have the preliminary engineering study, about a year or so. You have design and permitting, that's a couple of years. Right away, that's 2 years, 2.5 years, and then construction, that's 2 years. And again, again, this is very typical of the state time frame, again, assuming that all the money was in place. Now, the benefit of a public-private partnership is that this timeline can in fact be cut in half. So rather than 7 to 8 years, you can probably get a road from preliminary engineering all the way to construction in a 3.5, 4 year time frame. So, you know, they don't have to go through the bidding process and all the hoops that both the state and the county have to go through. But again, you know, we would ensure, and in fact, they would be required to meet all our standards and DOT standards in order to proceed with a privately funded roadway improvement. So again, the time frame could be potentially cut in half to improve a roadway. The other question that's come up several times is, you know, well, what's the width of the road? So our discussions internally have been for the network, Lake Picket, Chiliota, and Sustany Way. We would see if we could have a maximum of a 90-foot cross-section. Our typical cross-section is 120 feet. That is, you know, the width of the right-of-way to accommodate the roadway typically is 120. But for this area to basically adhere to the rural character of the area and to minimize impacts, our maximum, our right-of-way width or cross-section would be 90 feet. There are locations on Lake Picket South that, you know, we don't have the ability to go to 90 feet, but that section would have to be somewhere around 84, 85 feet to, again, to minimize the impacts. And again, as I stated earlier, our intent is certainly not to buy homes, and in terms of right-of-way impacts, we want to minimize those, so that's why we have the ability to squeeze that cross-section down a little bit further. This goes to the term sheet and trip allocations. This is just an example. So, for example, we have, as I was saying earlier, there are certain performance measures that have to be accomplished by private development. For example, if they build a portion of Lake Picket North, they would get X number of trips. If they constructed State Road 50 or a portion of State Road 50, they would be allocated a number of trips associated with their development. So in other words, if you know, they want to build 100 homes and it generates 100 trips, we want to ensure that that section of roadway that is impacted is in fact either fully funded or under construction. As I was saying earlier, it would have to be concurrent with the building permit. And so this is an example that would be inserted in the term sheet and the blanks would be filled in. And again, that process is under negotiation. It has to go through a roadway committee that's staffed by staff, but ultimately this is also going to be a policy decision by the Board of County Commissioners. So as I was saying earlier, the term sheet and agreement will be presented to the board for their review and approval. And of course, they have the latitude of changing it as they desire. And again, this is just another example. You know, single family at peak hour, the trip rate is 1.1, retail is 0.62, office is 1.49, and all these things would be embedded in both the term sheet and the agreement. So we would specify the trip rates associated with the respective land uses, and then that would determine, you know, in terms of the number of units or commercial square footage that would be built. In terms of the next steps, this is a little bit repetitive, but basically we want to make sure that we identify the respective costs and assignments as they relate to Lake Picket North and South. As I was mentioning earlier, this would have to go through a roadway committee process and also the Board of County Commissioners for their policy and ultimate approval if that's their desire. As I said earlier, the impacts have to be addressed in order to proceed for adoption of the amendment. And then the term sheet and agreements would have to be adopted by the board, either concurrent or prior to or concurrent to adoption. And then obviously all of this would have to go before the Board of County Commissioners for their consideration.